Welcome, everybody. This is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. Here in World Unity Week, bringing together two of the great minds of our age on the planet. The great theologian Ilia Delio, one of the foremost experts on Teilhard de Chardin and many other things, and I'll give you a full introduction in a moment, Ilia, and the great scientist, David Sloan Wilson, who is really at the cutting edge of evolutionary biology and in the field, and really demonstrating that altruism is a driving force for evolution at the group level. It is so exciting to have you with us. Welcome, Ilia.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
Now, let me just tell our audience a little bit about you, Ilia, as we get started in this dialogue today. Ilia Delio holds the Josephine C. Connolly Chair in Christian Theology at Villanova University. Her area of research is systematic constructive theology, with interest in process thought, evolution, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, and the import of these for Christian doctrine and life. In fact, Ilia, your most recent book, Re-Enchanting the Earth, Why AI Needs Religion. What a fascinating subject that is. And David, so wonderful to have you with us as well. You are a World Unity Week ambassador. We are so thrilled and delighted to have you. Your work is so important and at the cutting edge of science and evolutionary thinker. David Sloan Wilson is one of the foremost evolutionary thinkers and gifted communicator about evolution to the general public. He is a SUNY Distinguished Professor of Biology and Anthropology Emeritus at Bingham University. And of course, David, you're the president of the nonprofit organization Pro-Social World, one of our great World Unity Week co-conveners. And the mission of Pro-Social World is to consciously evolve a world that works for all. Some of David's most significant books is Does Altruism Exist? As well as This View of Life, Completing the Darwinian Revolution, and Pro-Social, the book itself, using evolutionary science to build productive, equitable, and collaborative groups. And that's with Paul Atkins and Stephen Hayes. And of course, fresh off publishing your first novel, the amazing Atlas Hugged, the autobiography of John Galt III. What an honor it is to have you both with us in World Unity Week. Now, I'm going to get out of the way and leave it up to you to have this dialogue. You are so welcome. We're so honored to have you with us. And Ilia, I am going to throw over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Ben. It's really an honor to be here during Unity Week, and especially with David Sloan Wilson, who is a renowned academician, a scientist, and a leading scholar in his area. As I thought about Unity Week, I reflected on my life. Would I have been here 20 years ago? And I'm not sure if I would, because I came from a very traditional Catholic background where, God was at the top and I was at the bottom, especially as a woman. And therefore, my whole career was to climb from matter to spirit, that the material world was okay, but a limited good, and that, the real stuff was up there in heaven or beyond. And, I grew up with that culture and with that consciousness. And so I grew up in a New Jersey neighborhood where I thought everyone was Italian American. So to think that we have evolved consciously over the last 20 years to a global consciousness of the rich diversity of this planet in terms of languages and cultures and spiritualities is just mind-boggling, truthfully, to reflect on. And yet, I think part of my own transformation into a new worldview, if I can use that term, was being introduced to the work of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the French Jesuit paleontologist who died the year I was born. So I feel there's a transmigration of spirit there, if nothing else, that we share maybe a kindred soul along the way. But really a profound thinker, someone who in his own life really revolutionized Christianity, and I think revolutionized it by actually liberating it. I think Christianity has been kind of in a wannabe state for centuries, and Teilhard really opened it up by really introducing incarnation in a whole new way. That this is not a God who's up there, out there, the elderly gentleman playing chess with planet Earth, but divinity, a fire, a center, a passion at the heart of materiality. And really, as I began to study Teilhard's thought, I was deeply drawn into his worldview of a world in evolution. A world not just simply in evolution, but evolving. Evolution itself as the dynamic process of life's unfolding towards, in his language, greater complexity and convergence. And so I think Teilhard is a good figure for the week of world unity. I think we'd have been quite at home in these conversations. As if those who are not familiar with his life, what he really sought to do was to bring together, in our old language, heaven and earth, matter and spirit, but he wouldn't have thought that way. He looked at materiality, earth, life, just life, and life itself having this dynamic quality to it, this dynamism, and really began to rethink materiality. Matter is good. It's wonderful. It's potent. It's oriented towards something more than itself. And that's what Teilhard, I think, as I think of Teilhard, who wrote for decades out of China, and someone whose writings were never published during his lifetime. So he never had the opportunity to be critiqued or to refine his writings. He simply wrote out of his own reflections. And what he, grew into over time was that there's something at the heart of this Big Bang universe, out of this planetary life, that is moving it, pushing it, drawing it in a way that it's life seeking more life. And I think Teilhard really brought to light, for me anyway, a much more believable, a credible God, a God, if we want to use that language or whatever language you want to say, there's something here that's pulling us. Pulling, forward this biological, incredible, complex systems of life, if you will, into something more. And I think what I find in Teilhard, and why this, so that even this quest for unity that each person brings into this endeavor this week, what draws us to unity? That would have been Teilhard's question. Why are we drawn to unity? Why are we not simply sufficient with where we are, wherever we are on the planet? Why is it that we can just wake up and just enjoy the sun or the air or the water and not have to be driven or feel drawn to something more? And it's precisely, I think, Teilhard's emphasis that we're an unfinished species. You might say on an unfinished planet in an unfinished universe. And therefore, he really emphasized that this whole universe is an unfolding. It's a becoming. And so it's not just a being, but it's a becoming. We're human becomings. And that, that dynamism of life for Teilhard really was oriented as he stepped back. I think of Teilhard stepping back and taking this panoramic view of life on planet Earth and saying, look, it seems to be moving as we move from simple cellular life to complex cellular life to, from, we might say, proto-conscious life to self-reflective conscious life. He's saying to himself, there's something going on here. That's more than what meets the measurement of the scientist. Science is fantastic. Science gives us insight and knowledge into nature, but science alone cannot really address the questions of ultimate meaning or the search for ultimacy itself. And he thought that there's something that with science, that goes with science, we might call it spirit or spirituality, or just the moreness of matter, however we want to phrase it. For Teilhard, it was what he called God Omega. Omega being a term that signifies a wholeness. There's something here that's already within, almost like an inchoate whole, a whole that's seeking to become more whole. And that wholeness is within, he said, and also ahead. And for this wholeness for Teilhard, this Omega principle of wholeness that he said is what he identified as God, a God who is not only at home in this unfolding planetary life, but seeking to become more part of this planetary life in a more conscious way. And that, what I find with Teilhard's vision is something that's very dynamic and livable. This is a living God, if we are to use the language of God, or a living spirit. There's a dynamic principle of life here. And he himself realized the limits and how limited traditional religion, and here he's speaking from Catholicism, how in his language, it was a straitjacket, this kind of dualism, a binary kind of way of thinking between body and soul, matter and spirit. And so Teilhard tried to coin new language. So he spoke about love as the core energy of the universe. Love simply from, in Teilhard's view, a point of energy. He's saying there's something at the heart of matter that continues to pull things together. What is it that pulls? Even if we talk about, what draws entities into systems, and what draws systems into more, relational systems. And so love as a core energy for Teilhard went hand in hand with the fact that consciousness seems to be increasing. Consciousness is a huge topic of discussion today, and yet I find it fascinating because we can't even talk about biology or matter apart from consciousness. So we don't know what matter is without the mind, so to speak. And Teilhard reflected on these matters quite deeply. And therefore, he saw consciousness sort of as the inside of matter and love as the outside of matter. And it's quite interesting, as if that, this whole planetary life is moving to greater consciousness, but also greater love. And so I think this quest for unity kind of touches upon these Teilhardian insights that the heart of matter is, in a sense, the heart of love. And love is without, it's a name that belongs to every person. It has no particular home, no particular religion, no particular language. Love is heart to heart, right? There's something deep within us that knows the other in a deep way when we speak from the center of love. And so Teilhard began to kind of sketch for us what he called a personalistic universe. That, and it's very interesting that technology is drawing us together. It has a lot of downsides, but it has a lot of pluses. That we have created technology called Zoom, for example, that has been able to keep us together during a time of pandemic. And so what Teilhard realized is that there's, we use our creativity, our imagination to create this world into something more unified, more conscious, more, in his terms, more personalized. And therefore, the idea of global consciousness really points to the fact that maybe what we're developing, and it would be a wonderful, thing to focus on, is a global heart. Could we, in a sense, develop, and I know David will speak on altruism and compassion, but a global ethic of compassion, something that Hans Kung, who recently died, a wonderful theologian, spoke about over the last few decades. And so what Teilhard envisions is a new type of person emerging. And I think one thing I have come to realize over the years is that we can't stay the way we are. And biology will tell us, well, we won't stay the way we are, right? That is, in a sense, kind of the part of the beauty of the story of evolution. And I have no problem changing as a person. And the question is, toward what will we change in our personhood? And here I think, instead of trying to hold on to what we have, I think Teilhard invites us to, in a sense, let go and enter into a new type of personhood, a new type of relationality, a new level of love with a new level of consciousness, which is, I think, what the quest for unity, it seems to me, at least it would speak to me, of those new levels of life. And Teilhard used different language. He said we are to become terrestrian. A new level of consciousness speaks a new level of terrestrial life. And so maybe one day we will no longer have, I'm from, the United States, or I'm from, New York or New Jersey or Australia or Papua New Guinea. Maybe we'll just be terrestrials with different ways of marking our space-time locations. Teilhard, coined the term planetization, that as we move forward into this new level of consciousness, and maybe we might say conscious love, that we're being planetized. And therefore he speaks of this energy, not only of love, but he speaks of a process of amorization. So Teilhard is a process thinker, he's a relational thinker. And therefore, this speaks very deeply to me. And I hope for those who are, called to this quest for unity, I hope, that Teilhard will speak to you as well, because what we do need are new ways to think about ourselves. We do need new language to describe our new realities. We have a consciousness of a new presence on this planet that continues to dynamically move towards something in its unfolding life. So on that note, I think I'll hand it over to one of the leading evolutionary thinker, and that is David Sloan Wilson. So David, I'll hand it to you, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, thank you, Ilia. That was so rich. And it takes two of us to fit the shoes of Teilhard. He was both a scientist and a Jesuit priest. You come from a Catholic background. I come from a scientific background. I know that you've absorbed a lot of science. And so basically, it's not right to say that you're unacquainted with science. And I've absorbed quite a bit of spirituality and religion. And so we're meeting in the middle. But it really does take two people like us to fill the shoes of that one person, Teilhard. And I want to begin just by noting that the concept of world unity was unimaginable until only even a century ago. Before then, and this was before the electronic age, and so technology has much to do about that. It was just our people at one scale or another, our tribe, our nation, our religion.
Right.
The concept that there's a whole earth out there was inconceivable until about the 19th century. The Baha'i faith was arguably the first faith that just tried to gather all people. And so Teilhard envisioned that. He was a true visionary, especially when you consider that he lived during both world wars. He was a stretcher bearer as a young man during World War I. And so he experienced the horrors of World War I as intimately as you possibly could, also lived through World War II, the communist revolution. And somehow, when the world was at war, he was able to see this as some kind of like cultural tectonic plates just clashing against each other on the way towards some unity, which at that time was the very last thing that was on display. And even though at the time he was a very admired scientist, he was definitely qualified as one of the most prestigious scientists of his days. He was offered academic positions that he could not take because the Catholic Church forbade him to take them. But strangely enough, he was largely forgotten within my field of evolutionary science, and kept alive by spiritually oriented people. And so, to tell my own story, I knew about Teilhard, but did not pay him much attention, just as the rest of my colleagues, but 2009, the year of Darwin, the 200th anniversary of his birth and the 150th anniversary of his publication of Origin of Species, there were events everywhere. I was permanently on the go all year, and one of these events was at the Vatican. The Vatican held a huge symposium about Darwin, and I was invited. And at that time, I thought, I really must pay my dues. I must read Teilhard. And I saw it as a kind of a homework, not expecting really to be blown away by it. But I was blown away by it because what I saw was how prophetic he was and how much he had anticipated in my field of evolutionary science. He was way, way ahead of his time. And every major position that he adopted, I claim, can be justified by modern evolutionary science. And I actually want to list these, what I regard as the major positions of Teilhard, and how, and very briefly, how these can be validated by evolutionary science. In the first place, as you've described, Ilia, he was entirely naturalistic. Somehow he was able to envision a form of religion and spirituality which was continuous with his Catholic faith. And he ended the phenomenon of man by saying, even for a mere biologist, this is nothing but the way of the cross. So he saw the continuity, but it was like a butterfly metamorphosing from a caterpillar. And when you read his work, you find it is entirely naturalistic. And the idea that there could be something that is richly spiritual, richly religious, even to the point where we can use the word God in a coherent way and remain within the boundary of naturalism, methodological naturalism. Amazing, amazing for him and amazing for us, and amazing for us. And I think the term interspirituality is an important term that will be well known to our audience. And the brief way to describe it is that all religious traditions, spiritual traditions, and even scientific traditions converge upon a common awareness of rich interconnectedness. Everything is interconnected. And once you really take that on, certain ethical conclusions follow, namely the futility of one part of the system attacking another part of the system. And so no matter how you arrive at that place, no matter what they call first-tier consciousness, whether you were a Catholic or an atheist or a Buddhist or an indigenous person, or no matter how you came by it, then this provides a kind of a space, let's call it second-tier consciousness, where we could all communicate with each other without necessarily shedding our traditions, our first-tier consciousness. There is no need to. And we can't, because it's part of who we are. I mean, part of evolution is history. Evolution is a historical process, and we shouldn't need to, but basically what we need to do is we need to make them all conciliant with each other. Well, Teilhard get that, and so should we. He understood the importance of cultural evolution. What he said was that in some ways we're just another species, a modified great ape. Nothing special about us that way. But in other ways, we're a new evolutionary process, therefore as significant in its own way as the origin of life. The origin of our species as a new evolutionary process is as significant. I don't know anyone else who drew that conclusion. He asked us to imagine the bushy tree of life slowly diversifying by the slow process of genetic evolution. And then one tip of one branch of the bushy tree of life, all of a sudden proliferating ever so much faster than the rest of the tree of life, even to the point of overtopping the rest of the tree. That's human cultures spreading out over the globe. And there is a negative aspect to this, Ilia. This is something that we really have to consider, is that this kind of evolution, it's not inevitable that there will be a happy ending to this. There's unhappy possibilities. And one of the things that Teilhard said, which is something we don't want to happen, at least I don't, is that he foresaw a time in which the only inhabitants of life on Earth are people and their domesticated plants and animals. Well, I certainly hope not. I think, what we need to work towards is human beings with their technology being wise stewards for life on Earth and maintaining the diversity, not only for our own benefit, but also, as I would say, a sacred obligation. So, but there's a whole conversation to be had there. But in any case, he truly saw human cultural evolution as a new evolutionary process. Today, we call that dual inheritance theory for the science geeks out there. Two streams of inheritance. We have our genes and we have our cultures, and they're thoroughly intertwined. There's a double helix of genes and cultures. He got that. Of course, he talked about the thinking dimension of evolution and consciousness as evolution reflecting upon itself. And so what this means, and this is very radical for my evolutionary colleagues, is that evolution can be a conscious, intentional, purposeful process. It need not be blind. I mean, there's always a blind component, by the way, but we can steer evolution, and we need to, because if we don't, evolution will take us where we don't want to go, more than likely. So in my own writings, I frequently say we must become wise managers of evolutionary processes. If we don't manage these fast-paced evolutionary processes swirling all around us and even within us, then they will definitely take us where we don't want to go. And why is it that the world is in such discord, that we have to look to the future for world unity? Why doesn't world unity just happen right away? Why didn't it happen a long time ago? There's counter forces. There's forces opposing world unity. There's forces opposing cooperation and love and compassion at every scale, even at the scale of the individual person or the couple. There's forces which oppose what we want in an aspirational sense. He understood the concept of superorganism, that there's some sense in which human society is like an organism and needs to become more so, and that scale of the organism needs to ultimately embrace the earth. That's what the Omega point is. And so the concept of society as a organism has a long and complex history, but bottom line is it's legitimate. It's legitimate. And when you talk of love, I think when I write about this, including in my novel, Atlas Hugged, one of the epiphanies is, look inside every healthy organism and you will find love. You will find harmony. You will find cooperation. That's what an organism is. An organism is a unit that has become so cooperative internally that all parts of the unit work for the common good. And if that's not love, what would be? So you could literally say life is love. The original life is love at a tiny scale of those protocells. And whenever something qualifies as an organism, then love has conquered hatred at that sphere. And then we must, of course, expand that to the worldwide scale. He talked about coalescence. He talked about tiny grains of thought, which I interpret as small-scale human society coalescing and coalescing and coalescing. And that's what we see now. Now we're at the point where societies have become, the whole earth is carved up into only about less than 200 nations, 200 millions and billions of people that are cooperating to a remarkable degree. Against that background, then global world unity is just one final step in a very long journey. And so it doesn't seem like such a big step when you measure it against the long march of human evolution. He talked about the role of technology, as you did, Ilia. This cannot happen without technology. No brain without a nervous system, and no worldwide nervous system without electronic communication. And it's fascinating that if you look at the first nervous system, our nervous system, and the nervous system of all multicellular animals, that was the same problem. Basically, you had millions and millions of cells that needed to be coordinated, and the nervous system was the evolution of an electronic communication system to coordinate millions and millions of our bodies and organ systems and all of that. So technology plays a huge role, and at the same time, to become overly technocratic is one of the dangers. So one of the dangers is to basically do away with the rest of life on Earth. Another danger is to become so technocratic that we lose sight of humanity. And then the final is the sanctity of the individual. So, I mean, bearing in mind that he was operating during World War II, Nazi Germany, forms of socialism, forms of basically society as an organism that we definitely don't want. And so he was quite careful about saying, what is it about this superorganism that we should want? And he talked eloquently as the individual is that, and the individual freedom and rights is that pearl beyond price, he put it. And he said that, what's freedom? Freedom has to be relational. You've written about this yourself, Ilia. No person is an island. There's nothing worth wanting that doesn't involve good relations with other people and with the rest of the planet. And so the superorganism has to honor that. So that's quite a comprehensive rundown, and I'm prepared to back up each and every one of those. But I think we could bring this to an end, my piece of it to an end, Ilia, and we could just ask you to reflect upon that, or maybe bring in some of our friends here to join our conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David. I mean, you named some very important points here for Teilhard. I just want to maybe respond just to a few of them. I love the way you really have spoken positively about directed evolution, or that evolution has some kind of direction, which, as you said, many scientists really disparage the idea that evolution has any direction whatsoever. It's just simply a process of life. But clearly it seems to be going somewhere, right? It has some kind of pattern to it, which is what Teilhard recognized. And why do I emphasize that? Because truthfully, I think a lot of people do not have a consciousness of evolution. In other words, a conscious awareness that life is about change and it's about growing in relationship in a way that we form larger groups, or you might say, societies that are more connected, which is, the way to use Teilhard's language of complexity, we complexify. And to me, that's really an important point, because I think one of the things that prevents unity is still this notion of the individual. If you notice, Teilhard very, very rarely uses the language of the individual, but he does use the language of personhood. And a person is a relational being. And one of his famous maxims is that union differentiates. And I think one of the fears, certainly in the Western world here, one of our great fears is if I have to merge with someone else, that I'm going to lose my individualism, And Teilhard would say, no, just the opposite. The beauty of who you are as a person is actually highlighted precisely in union with someone else. And I think and here I do think bad theology gives rise to bad culture, if you might, when we have these ideas that I need to be, I'll do it my way, to use Frank Sinatra's old song, and no one's going to tell me what to do. This kind of thinking, this kind of autonomous thinking, it really belies, the whole beauty of nature itself. Nature, as you have written so wonderfully, David, is about cooperation. It's about, joining together in this symphony of life. And we don't lose anything, we gain. Our own giftedness shines through precisely when we share those gifts with others. And so I just wanted to highlight that, one of the definitions of beauty is the harmony of contrasts. And that's why you mentioned something else that I thought was really, really good. I want to maybe just take that coalescence idea. again, I think sometimes even in this quest for unity, we want unity, but we fear what we might lose in this. If we truly were to become a new type of matrix, a geographical, a terrestrial matrix of life. But the fact is, life is like I think of it like a stained glass window that, you can't say this piece of glass, has priority over this piece, because it's precisely when they're together that the beauty of light is diffracted in the many individual pieces of the glass. And that's something like life itself, right? Even as you look into a flower, and the many, as you take a flower in its detail, the stem, the petals, and the many sub, organelles there that contribute to the overall beauty of the whole. And I think that's what Teilhard was getting at, the beauty of the whole. It's precisely if we could think about a new way of coming together, which Teilhard did see, and it was something I'd love to hear more from you at some point, because he thought that biological evolution has maxed out in terms of occupying geographical space and the maximization of species, so to speak. And he said, now we have to converge. The only way forward, he thought, is by coming together, by unifying, which he did think that, as you well pointed out, technology as the second nervous system, so to speak, of a globalized planet. So you had a number of fantastic points, David, and the idea of forming a superorganism. And I think part of our, and I hope, in as you continue in your pro-social work and and as we all continue to work for unity, because we are all doing this each in our own way, that we don't fear what we will become together, that we see what we're becoming together is more just, more peaceful, more compassionate, more beautiful in our being together in a new whole, where we won't lose anything of our individual personalities or giftedness, but that what we are in our unique creative beingness will shine forth in a new way. And I just wanted and I think Teilhard would, clearly see that, because he thought, in his words, it's beyond the ego we must look, to really, in a sense, move toward this type of supra-organistic life that you mentioned. So anyway, just one other thought. You did mention, and it's true, Teilhard, and I want to just highlight this, he was not a naive optimist, as if so many people think we're just going to always get better. Clearly not. He thought if we do not become conscious of what we're capable of on either side, we're capable of destroying this planet, as we can see right now, as the sea levels are rising and the global warming continues. But we're also capable of unifying this planet. And we do have to take the reins of evolution into our own hands right now as the thinking edge of evolutionary life. But he clearly saw in his essays on activation of energy, we can annihilate ourselves. And he did say that. So
yeah, he said there could be an apocalypse, and
yes.
and this Omega point might take 1 million years. He said we don't want that to.
We can blow ourselves up. We can just destroy everything. We have a power, and it does distinguish us, I think, in a way, from other species of life who live much more harmoniously, I think, and cooperatively, within the overall fecundity of life. By the way, Teilhard's notion of the human person as being sort of a unique species, as self-reflective conscious species, was influenced by Henri Bergson, the French philosopher, in his book Creative Evolution. So Bergson's notion of this élan vital, was very influential on Teilhard, but also that there's something that within the human species, Homo sapiens, that sort of is a leap, into a new kind of
Let me pick up on just a couple things of those, Ilia. I think there's quite a lot of clarification has taken place very recently. And it's important to stress that I call my field of evolution during the 20th century as the Great Constriction. And that constriction was to genetic evolution. We called it the modern synthesis, and it was very narrowly centered around Mendelian genetics. And it was only then that the idea that evolution has no purpose became established as a strong dogma. But cultural evolution was left out of the modern synthesis and didn't begin to be developed until the closing decades of the 20th century. So it's only very recently that my tribe of evolutionary scientists have gone back to basics and described evolution as any process that includes the three ingredients of variation, selection, and replication. And one thing we can say, this is, I think, is a great clarification that is that new, so many people don't know about it, is that human society from the very beginning must be highly vigilant against exploitation within groups. When we talk about love and compassion and in all of their forms, altruism, the one thing we need to know about it is that's vulnerability, that whenever we extend ourselves to others or to our groups as a whole, we expose our jugular veins, we expose our soft underbellies, we make ourselves vulnerable.
Anti-Darwinian.
to more self-seeking social strategies. And so human society must be protective against that. And when you look at those tiny grains of thought, in other words, hunter-gatherer societies, that's what you find. You find a kind of a rugged individualism, individuals who will not be pushed around, and yet at the same time, they work together. And so basically, it's individualism and communitarianism in balance. And then as you now look at the long stretch of human history, you find that when society works well, it's because of that balance. And I love reading the period. You're a great scholar, Ilia, and I try to be. But Tocqueville, for example, who wrote Democracy in America, had wise things to say about self-interest, which he calls self-interest rightly understood. And what he said is that as we're coming off of autocracies, autocratic societies, kings and so on, to more democratic societies, Tocqueville said, everything's going to have to be justified in terms of self-interest, because now individuals are much more autonomous agents. If you're going to appeal to them to do something, you have to explain why it's in their self-interest. But at the same time, self-interest, rightly understood, is we cooperate for our mutual self-interest. So, but the kind of...
maybe just here on this point, one thing I want to just maybe highlight for Teilhard is he brought together, so his notion of evolution as having this inner outer dimension, this really led him to understand that the kind of evolution, because as you're talking about the vulnerability, right, we do become vulnerable in the face of others, requires a kind of a mystical, if I can use his language, a mystical side. He brought together contemplation and evolution, what we might call centering self. And I do think it's not just, I think it's, God bless de Tocqueville, but I think it's not just a self-preserving. But here's the thing about spirituality, why I think it can play a very vital role in this quest for unity, precisely because we do need something that grounds us. In other words, what is it that would hold us together? Why should I love another person? Why should I care for someone who I'm not biologically related to? Why should I want to share my resources with someone that I am unrelated to? So there has to be something more than my own individual self. And that's where Teilhard really spoke about a kind of a, if I can use the word groundedness in this omega, a groundedness in this center, this infinite center within, if I can use that language. And today, and I'm sure many people involved in unity, whether it's yoga or meditation or whatever it is that brings people into a deeper center within, because here's the thing, the more we can find that ground within us, the more we find that same ground that draws us outwardly to others. And that's the beauty of spirituality in evolution. There's like a tethering. This is what escapes sometimes the science, the measurement of the scientific tool. There's something that's binding us. Love, love, gets culturally, it can be a word that is misleading and too superficial, because I like it. I love the word love, but in other words, what is it that will draw us together? And that requires a self-reflective process, a letting go process, what we would call a kenotic process. Am I willing to give my life for something more than myself? I think the quest to unity begins at home. How do I live with whoever I'm living with? How do I live with my neighbors? How do I share in my local neighborhood? So I agree that, how much do we want to lose ourselves? Maybe that's the question. And I think, and Teilhard spoke about losing oneself as finding oneself on a higher level. And I think that it's a very kind of gospel idea, the losing and finding, the letting go and the self-emptying and the self-filling. I think these kind of dynamics, I would like to see more included as we continue to reflect on biological evolution. And I love the fact that you are bringing in cultural evolution with genetic evolution. That's fantastic.
Well, yeah, I agree with most of that. My comments about Teilhard notwithstanding, I did not imply that the way it works or the way it should work is people being, first and foremost, thinking of their own individual self-interest, and then for some alignment to take place after that. Quite the contrary. And this is deeply embedded in human morality. What we can say about human morality from an evolutionary perspective, or even from any perspective. I had the most wonderful conversation with a philosopher named Simon Blackburn, who's a great moral philosopher. And I said, Simon, before we talk about morality from an evolutionary perspective, just define it for me as you would in a philosophy 101 class. And he says, well, there's two dimensions to morality. There's a compulsory dimension. We have norms, and when we're expected to abide by them, if we don't, we get punished. So there's that side of morality, and then there's the voluntary side which is love and sympathy and empathy and so on. And that was so perfect because it's exactly what you expect from an evolutionary perspective. Because of the fragility and the vulnerability of all things prosocial, then unless you have the compulsory side, it's just not safe to be a loving prosocial person. And so basically the compulsory side creates the social environment, the protective social environment, where we could all express our other-oriented natures to the fullest. And when those protections are in place, it's at that point that you willingly become part of something larger than yourself. And that's all baked into human nature. So these are the conditions. This provides, I want to say as we close our wonderful conversation, a practical toolkit, a set of practical tools that when we work together, we could actually design our social environments. And what would that be but building the noosphere, working towards the noosphere? It is a process of conscious design. And even though we talk about making it larger and larger, it will always be multi-level. The smallest level of working in small groups to get things done will always be like a cell in the multicellular society. And at every level, we need these protections. And when we provide them, then we flourish. We flourish. And so I feel that what's on offer and what makes me so excited about participating in World Unity Week and elsewhere is that we really have a more of a toolkit, a practical toolkit. We really can kind of show up like plumbers and carpenters on a site and size it up and make things better. That it's gotten to that level of practical know-how at the same time as it's becoming a cosmology, basically Teilhard's cosmology is fulfilling itself. So we have the cosmological aspects, which is so amazing, and we have the toolkit. So this makes me optimistic.
Wonderful. I'm totally with you, David, on the way and your pro-social quest for unity. And yeah, we do, right? We have the capacity to create, to imagine, and we have the capacity to act. And
it begins by basically for people to adopt the primary identity of a human being and citizen of the earth. That's why World Unity Week is so important. The people that are gathered here, basically, they're saying, well, whoever else I am, man, woman, culture, ethnic race, religion, whatever, I am first and foremost a human being and citizen of the earth. I'm not going to lose those other identities. We can't do that. It's part of who we are, but we can coordinate them. We can coordinate them for the benefit of the whole earth. But if you don't work for the benefit of the whole earth, you don't hit a target unless you aim for it. And so world unity has to be the explicit target. And then we coordinate everything underneath it.
yeah, maybe we could just say we're first terrestrian and then we're from Washington, D.C. or the United States or whatever it is, that.
We need to invent, but this is what's so amazing. And this is what another thing Teilhard got right, because he had this long sweep of history. I mean, as a paleontologist, he had to, so there's some sense in which just the increased scale of everything is just makes it actually the most natural thing to have a world identity, a whole identity, because of electronics, because of global economics, because of, viewing the Earth from space in 100 different ways. It is becoming easier to imagine ourselves as citizens of the Earth, and all the other identities appear shallow. I like to say that in my tiny city of Binghamton, New York, such a tiny city, Rust Belt city, in the public school system, 20 first languages are spoken.
Wow.
20 first languages. That's the degree to which the Earth has been just mixed up. And people from 20 different places on Earth are now going to school in my tiny little city of Binghamton, New York. How could they not think of themselves? And then, of course, here we are, speaking for people across the globe as easily as if you were by my side. So how can you not think of world unity? And you have people like the Pope with his encyclical. You've got His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Beyond Religion, an ethics for the whole world. It's just forced itself upon us that we are citizens of the world. And so now we have to act accordingly. And that inner and outer part is important. This requires an inner transformation, but not only an inner transformation. It requires an outer transformation as well. So there's so much more to say, Ilia, but I think that we're probably at time. So hopefully we've said just enough to give people a taste of what we could all be reaching for and should be reaching for.
Thank you, David. Really, you have such a rich conversation. And as you say, there's so much more to say. And yet, I hope we leave on the note that we're both two people walking the one earth, two terrestrians have met in cyberspace for the good of the whole, for the good of the earth. We belong to a beautiful wholeness of life. And each of us, every person, continue to participate, to create, to just be part of this unfolding life. We can become, I think, a more unified planet of justice and peace and compassion. And it's my prayer for all of us.
Perfect final words.
What an absolute privilege to be witness to this conversation. And it feels like this is just the beginning. There's so much more richness to explore. There were questions to get to, which we'll have to wait till next time. But what a great privilege. Thank you so much on behalf of World Unity Week and Unity Earth, Sister Ilia Delio and Professor David Sloan Wilson. You have inspired and elevated us. And this rich, binary look at Teilhard de Chardin as an icon and prophet and a scientist for world unity is something that is echoing and will continue to echo to eternity. Thank you. And we look forward to round 2, whenever that shall be. Thanks for now.
Great.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes. I couldn't agree with myself more at the end there. That was an incredible privilege, David. And I know Sister Ilia wanted to be here with us, but had another commitment. But it's tremendous to have you with us for this short little discussion, post-dialogue. This was a very significant dialogue. I sent it to my father, who said it was a dream come true for him as a 91-year-old scientist and Teilhard devotee to see you, the scientist, and Ilia, the theologian, connecting and converging so extraordinarily. So thank you, and thank you for being with us. You are a World Unity Week ambassador. We have about 12 or 13 minutes of discussion time, David. So what was that like for you, reliving that engagement again with Sister Ilia?
Well, it was intense. I think that there was, I'm not boasting, but amazing conversation. And I want to turn to other people as fast as possible. I think the only thing I'll say now is that, first of all, to praise World Unity Week for providing a vehicle for this and to bring us all together. And secondly, if anyone who listened to that is inspired to actually roll up their sleeves and get to work with that practical toolkit that I keep talking about, then to encourage them to get in touch with us at ProSocial. And ProSocial is a proud partner of World Unity Week, and there's been numerous events throughout the week. And so we're really trying to walk the walk in terms of consciously evolving a world that works for all. And I just asked everyone within listening range to please join us.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I want to acknowledge Patrick Carolyn, who was the connector and the bridge to Sister Ilia Delio. And Patrick, well done. Congratulations. That was, beautiful fruits of your efforts to bring David and Ilia together. And you're here with us. Did you have a comment or anything you wanted to contribute there, Patrick? We need to unmute you. You should be able to unmute yourself. Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm unmuted now. So, yes, just a couple of thoughts. First of all, thank you, David, for that wonderful conversation. For me, it was just great to hear. Ilia is a dear friend of mine. I'm actually having dinner with her on Sunday night, so I'm going to tell her all of the comments people share with her, the comments people make today. But it was just such a wonderful, rich discussion between you and Ilia, and to bring in both the spirituality and the science of evolution. One of the things I know that Ilia and I have talked about, and I just wrote an article about this recently, about if we're gonna move forward, we have to start thinking of evolution not as science, but as part of our sacred story, as our sacred story. And this is how Teilhard perceived evolution, not separate from our sacred story, but it is our sacred story. And so moving forward, that really is kind of, and this is what both you and Ilia brought together. And I, as Ben said, I really look forward to chapter 2 of your discussion. And I'd be happy to set up a whole meeting just for that part of it, just to hear you two talk again, because it really was such a wonderful, rich experience of bringing together. And for folks who don't know Ilia, Ilia is a Franciscan sister. Most of her theology comes from the teachings of people like Duns Scotus and Bonaventure and the Franciscans. So she, and St. Francis really understood the interconnectedness of everything and everybody of all creation. And so Ilia is a person who brings that into what Teilhard also talked about. And she's also a scientist. So she really merges all of those together into one basic theology. And again, it's a theology centered on evolution as a sacred story, evolution and God as one and the same. And this is just a process of love, and that we're just all moving forward in love. So again, thank you, David, for that. It was just awesome. I just came back from 5 days of backpacking across the White Mountains. So it's so great to come back and hear this.
Right. Well, you're right that the people that are inspired by the concept of a conscious evolution, a kind of a sacred conscious evolution, and then the so-called hard scientists evolutionary scientists have until now occupied totally parallel universes. And I see my main role is to help combine those. And when we do, then I really do think it's going to be amazing. We'll have a worldview that is can be entirely justified by science. I think that this is happening fast, so there will be opportunities. If I had more time, I'd tell you about some of my partners. Some of them are on this call. Some of them are on this call. So I do think that this synthesis of science and spirituality is taking place, can be catalyzed.
Magnificent. Thank you so much. Thank you for the co-creation, Patrick, and for bringing this together. We are up against the time because we have an 8:30 musical starting, and we're going to be led into the musical, The Magical Canoe. This is a musical that the team have put on in 3 days, the musicians and the artists, and it's all built around a news story. So anyone who's interested in the news story or news stories, do bear in mind in a few moments, we're going to have Dr. Julie Krull every day does the whole story in 10 minutes today. And that's going to be interesting. And then we're going to go across to the musical. We'd love you to join us, and we'll share the way across here. We have a special invitation. We do have a time for a few comments left. And Annie Spade, it'd be lovely to hear from you as well, your reflections on this amazing dynamic conversation between David and Ilia. Annie? You muted yourself, I think. You were under.
Oh, I did. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Got you now.
Yeah. So many great points. But there's one that I want to really pull out because actually, I just completed co-stewarding a room with World Unity Week with Tex Albert in Quebec, and our room was Whole Self-Nurturing and Healing Justice. And we opened the room on Tuesday with a quote from Teilhard, which is one of his most famous. Someday after harnessing the wind, the waves, the ether, we will harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. And what we discussed with Cosmos Journal editor Rhonda Fabian in our room that morning was that as we come together in this kind of co-creative convergence, this is the new fire. And I heard Sister Ilia just now articulate that point that evolution is also ours to drive. And so this just feels like such a perfect bookend to our week. And I also want to invite anyone who is not a part of our Teilhard de Chardin Facebook group page to hop on. This is how I met Ben. This is how I met Tex and a number of other people. So I'm just so thrilled. And thank you, Ben, and the entire World Unity Week team for this week and for tonight. Very special.
Yes, we met in the Teilhard de Chardin group. How amazing is that? And what a journey it's been since then. We have time for two more brief comments. And Jeff Gunung has been working with David along with Kate Sheehan Roach to connect, again, to build bridges between pro-social and the spiritual, interspiritual frameworks. Brother Jeff, it'd be great to hear from you at this time.
Great. You know how wine and pasta are often better the second day? Well, I was here during the original recording, so I have a chance to listen to this again. Extraordinary. I mean, this session was such a keeper. And, you know, Teilhard had so many things that he put very explicitly, and he gave us the vision of the noosphere and the omega point. But there's other things he was cryptic on. So I have just a brief question for you from something that Teilhard said in The Phenomenon of Man. He said that man is not the center of the universe as once we thought in our simplicity, but something much more wonderful. The arrow pointing the way to the final unification of the world in terms of life. Man alone constitutes the last born, the freshest, the most complicated, the most subtle of all the successive layers of life. This is nothing else other than the fundamental vision, and I shall leave it at that. So, David, what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, in some ways, I feel like letting the master have the final word there, but I do think that there's a sense in which that could actually be translated into, science talk. But why would we want to when it's so beautiful as written? But I do think that we are the only species on Earth capable of consciously evolving not only our own future, but becoming wise stewards of the whole Earth. There's no other species that can do that. There's no other species that even comes close. And so that uniqueness and that directionality, as opposed to something that already exists, something that can become, but only if we do it in the right way. So I mean, that's a very, in addition to being poetic and cryptic and inscrutable, it can be a true, basically true. Nothing I would change. So much to reflect upon, but that passage could be that arrow that we're supposed to represent.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Jeff. Maybe you can put that quote in the chat, Jeff. I'd love to be able to ponder over that when time is a bit more ample. We do have art coming in 15 minutes. We need to go to the musical. So science and spirituality have come together, and we need some art into the mix as well. Nan World Peas, if you have a quick comment. No time for questions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'll say the same thing I put in the chat. The original definition of the word apocalypse is revelation. And John of Patmos, that was an island in Greece, meant it to be a revelation, a revealing of a new truth, a series of prophecies leading to a new revolution or idea, like we are all the second Messiah, because that's what it was interpreted as, the coming of the second Messiah. And now we know maybe there is no second Messiah. Maybe there's a daughter of God coming. And the truth is we're all the second Messiahs. We should be walking on water. We should be multiplying fish and, we should be so much further ahead than we are after 2,000 years. The time has come to all be the second Messiah. Amen.
Good on you, Nan. Good on you, Nan. World Peace. And reminds me of the line, we are the ones we've been waiting for, which
we are.
Marion Williamson was just with us. I think she used that quite frequently. Yeah. Thank you.
You are the second Messiah. You are the chosen one.
Indeed, indeed we are. And David said that perhaps we should have the final word, leave it with the master. And I think that's a tremendous idea. So to finish this extraordinary conversation, I'd like to bring forward the one and only Dr. Kurt Johnson, who in so many ways is the reasons we're here today. Kurt.
Yeah, thank you so much. One thing I was thinking as I was listening, isn't this great news that so much of this is already becoming old news? Isn't it great news that so much of this conversation was not new. And so I asked myself, why is that? And the reason is, as both Ilia and David acknowledge, is that the mainstream scientific community and the mainstream religious community are still very polarized in the old paradigm mainstreams. So something that's new to one is, and other things that are new to the other. But what's interesting is the transformational community, I guess that would be us, that's in the middle. There's really nothing new here at all. Barbara Marx Hubbard was writing about this for 20 to 30 years. Ken Wilber for 20 to 30 years. Bruce Lipton, Elizabeth Sartorius, go through the whole list. So thank goodness we're getting a breaking down of the old mainstreams who can now allow themselves to talk about these things, which in this exchange were very, very fundamental and very, very basic. So it's just absolutely good news that that's becoming old news. And there's nothing new to that. When I run around the world talking about inner spirituality, it's the same thing. There's nothing new about inner spirituality now. Everybody gets it. We either start doing this or we're going other directions. So I think that that's what's really wonderful about what we saw unfold here.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Professor David Sloan Wilson. Thank you, Sister Ilia Delio. Thank you, everybody. This has been Teilhard de Chardin as an icon for World Unity. Thank you. And this was the final plenary in World Unity Week. Stay tuned to look around for the whole story in 12 minutes or less by Julie Krull, starting in a few minutes. And please come